Today's first plenary presentation concerns adding value through front-end planning. From Arizona State University, we have Ed Gibson, Professor and Director of the School of Sustainable Engineering and the Built Environment. Prior to joining ASU, Ed started the recently accredited construction engineering program at the University of Alabama, and before that, was a faculty member at the University of Texas at Austin for 15 years. He has received several awards for research excellence and has twice received the CII Outstanding Researcher Award. Please welcome Ed Gibson.
Good morning. Wow, two tough acts to follow, but I'll try my best. I feel very privileged to be standing in front of you this morning representing Research Team 268 and also the hundreds of individuals who have participated and provided input into the front-end planning research efforts at CII through the years. My job today is to describe our team's task, which was to integrate the work that has been done in front-end planning over the past 2 decades. What a large task that is. This front-end planning research thread has been sustained by the value that you, the membership, have provided, and it has in turn led to a number of tools that add value to your projects and processes. CII kicked this thread off at the annual conference in 1991 in Monterey, California. By the way, in context, if you were born on or before that date, you're now legal in all 50 states to drink alcohol. Many of you have used the projects that we've developed. Some have just heard of them, and to some of you, this is new information. I plan to take you behind the numbers to understand the breadth and depth of materials available and to share what our research team has done to pull all this work together over the past 2 years. Putting some perspective on this journey, this research thread has been overseen by all 4 CII directors, Richard Tucker, Ken Eichmann, Hans Van Winkle, and now Wayne Crew, along with 5 associate directors for research. This is pretty remarkable and shows the value that CII has added to the understanding of front-end planning and the value that it has seen from the research that we've conducted. I've had the honor to work on 7 research efforts that have focused on this process since 1991. Team numbers are listed here. Actually, through the years, we went from being called task forces to research teams to project teams, and now back to research teams. And these efforts have led to CII Annual Conference presentations in Boston, twice in San Diego, San Antonio, Toronto, Vancouver, Keystone, Orlando, and now here. During that time, you have provided 127 research team members, and I've had the privilege of working with 17 extraordinary graduate students who have added tremendous value to the research effort. I also give homage to 2 other teams focused on front-end planning during this 21-year stretch, teams 221 and 241, and these teams included an additional 30 individuals. Tying into one of the themes of this conference, I can say that on that first research team in 1991, we had a number of members who had begun their careers in the late 1940s or early 1950s. Many of the young people in the audience here, including those that we just met, and even a few of our RT 268 team members, should have careers well into the 2050s. That is a 110-year span of value-adding influence. During the course of this sustained research effort, we have collected data to support the front-end planning processes through a variety of means, gaining input from 279 organizations, including the majority of the organizations in this room today. In context, again, that's 2.5 times the number of current CII member organizations. Data have been collected from 6 continents and 40 countries. I've had the privilege of being involved in implementation of the front-end planning tools on 6 continents myself, and this surely shows the global leadership of CII at play. Each of the 7 research projects have collected and analyzed both quantitative and qualitative data. In total, we've looked at the front-end planning process in relation to project success on 1,017 projects with cumulative final cost of greater than $88 billion. Let me take a few moments to discuss adding value through effective and available processes and practices. Every study that we've conducted, every study, has shown that effective front-end planning leads to statistically significant performance increase over those projects that are less well planned. The percentages have varied depending on the project sector, the size and complexity of the samples, but as you can see, we have measured very large cost and schedule differences from 6 to 25% on cost and 6 to 39% on schedule. And in addition, we've seen improvement in business performance, reduction in changes, and better operability on projects that are better planned. It just makes sense. To effectively plan in the front end a capital facility, the organization must expend somewhere between 1.5% and 5%, again, of total project cost, again, depending on sector size and project complexity. Conservatively, we've been able to measure 3 to as much as 10 to 1 return on each dollar spent in planning. This is truly the value add of front-end planning. Over the years, we've documented the front-end planning process or gated process extensively. In fact, it did not publicly exist on paper before our effort began. And we have spent much effort during that time developing a suite of 7 tools that can be used by leaders to manage the front-end planning process. Some of these tools are new, and I'll outline them a little later. Others have been around for quite a while. And we will be discussing this entire integrated suite of tools during our implementation session later today. This suite of tools is among the most popular that CII has produced in its existence. The tools collectively have been purchased in hard copy or downloaded over 40,000 times, and this does not take into consideration the copies and continued sharing that these tools have enjoyed past that transaction in your organizations. As an example of this suite of tools and why they're so widely used, let's look at the Project Definition Rating Index, or PDRI tools. These 3 tools cover 3 major sectors: industrial, building, and infrastructure. And each is a risk management tool that allows the user or project team to determine how well the project is defined during front-end planning. By the way, Research Team 268 developed the infrastructure version and rolled it out 2 years ago. In development of these tools, we were able to mobilize industry practitioners through workshops to provide input. Combined, the amount of experience these individuals brought to the tools was in excess of 4,000 years. In context, if we put that experience together sequentially, it would go back to the time when Stonehenge was at substantial completion. Talk about a generational reach, right? Add to this development performance testing and validation on 3 of the 3 PDRI tools and over $15 billion worth of projects, and you have the recipe for widespread use in our industry. In our survey of the membership last year, we found that 78% of those of you who responded used the PDRI. This is an almost 15% increase in relation to our survey in 2004. Of the respondents, 96% indicated that their organization gained value from using the CII suite of front-end planning tools, and no one felt that the tools hurt. In our study, we asked respondents why they were not using CII tools and what were the major barriers to effective front-end planning. Some of the answers are listed here on the slide. Certainly, it's okay if organizations are using other processes and methods as long as the planning is being done effectively. These reasons are the same that we heard in 2004. And frankly, to address many of these issues, our team has updated one CII tool and written another. A large part of our implementation session today will be spent going over these publications and addressing the barriers that we consistently hear to effective front-end planning. First, we updated the front-end planning toolkit to version 3.0 over the past year. and it's available now from download from CII. It includes the new PDRI for infrastructure, discussion reflecting all three major project sectors, and more insight from what we've learned over the years. We'll give you a demonstration of this interactive tool at our implementation session later today. A major focus of our time over the past year has been to integrate all of the front-end planning tools into one document in an easy-to-read format. This must-have publication, Adding Value Through Front-End Planning, is available as a conference publication now and will be in final form in 2 months. It outlines the available tools, how to implement them, how to maintain momentum, and gives a number of tips on how to make sure that your front-end planning process is done effectively. We go over the contents of this document in our implementation session, and we'll hand out a card outlining where you can download this document immediately in our implementation session. After 21 years of development, we know why, when, how, and what should be done during front-end planning. We provided a suite of tools that many of you are using. But as I go around and talk to organizations, it's apparent that we're just not fully utilizing all of the tools available and being consistent in our planning practices. How many of you are losing your experienced planners to retirement in the next 2 to 3 years or have already lost them? How many of you are not training your employees on front-end planning practices? How many of you either don't have or don't follow your own front-end planning processes and procedures? How many of you don't take your plan seriously and lose discipline during project execution? If your answer is yes to any of these questions, you're not going to improve or even keep up with your competitors. Our research team may be riding into the sunset, but you cannot take a vacation from planning and be successful. There are multitudes of projects out there that need to be well planned. And my challenge to you is to go back to your organization next week, assess where you are, look at what you need to do, and get back to the basics of good front-end planning. The truth is in the data, and also in our implementation session later today. These are some of the organizations within CII who are using front-end planning tools that we've developed. They're probably sitting next to you here in the audience. The question is, are you? I would be remiss if I did not give out a shout out to our wonderful research team. It's been a great experience working with many of these individuals over the years. And some of these individuals I've worked with for over 10 years on the front-end planning effort. We have a terrific panel for our implementation session, and we'll describe the new and updated publications, including our overarching planning guide and the new version of the front-end planning toolkit. And then we'll provide some testimonials briefly describing how organizations are using CII front-end planning tools and the results they've seen and some lessons learned. And then we'll have plenty of time to answer your questions or for you to share your experiences with us. And of course, we'll provide you with access to a number of tools. Meet us in Salon B of the Harborside Ballroom, where it should be cozy, at 1 and 2:15 to get started on significantly improving your projects. Thank you.
Next, we have Environmental Life Cycle Assessment and Carbon Footprinting for Business. Our presenter is Chris Hendrickson, the Duquesne Light Company Professor of Engineering at Carnegie Mellon University and co-director of the university's Green Design Institute. His research, teaching, and consulting all focus on engineering planning and management. He is a member of the National Academy of Engineering, the American Society of Civil Engineering, the Transportation Research Board, and a fellow of the American Association of the Advancement of Science. He has received numerous awards and a Rhodes Scholarship. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Hendrickson.
Well, thank you. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. I hope you're all enjoying the conference. I'm certainly enjoying the conference. I'm going to be talking about a subject that I think is completely new to the Construction Industry Institute, and that's environmental life cycle assessment and carbon footprinting. So I'll try and give you kind of a little introduction to that and talk about what we'll do in the implementation session. I first encountered environmental life cycle assessment about 20 years ago, so it's been around for a while. I was working with IBM at the time, and I started to think about how to improve the environmental performance of computers. And it didn't take me long to realize that one of the keys to doing that was to worry about the life cycle. If you think about computers, they use a lot of electricity during their lifetime. And so one of the things you wanted to think about in doing a design for a computer was reducing the electricity use. And then there's the end of life for computers. You think that you just send them off somewhere, but what you really want to do is try and reuse a lot of the components in these computers. So that's when I started to become interested in environmental life cycle assessment. And I like to start off, these are the learning objectives, which I'll be talking about: understand the basic concepts of life cycle assessment, relate construction processes to sustainable development, and compare alternative products and designs like I was doing with those computers and trying to reduce their electricity use over time. Whoop. I am in Pittsburgh, and this is where I've been since the early 1970s. And Pittsburgh's an interesting place to think about environmental progress. Back in the 19th century, Pittsburgh was described as hell with the lid off. And this is the type of thing that the person who came up with that line was talking about. This is one of the industrial valleys, the river valleys, that Pittsburgh encompasses. And you can see that these are the old steel mills in full throttle with lots and lots of emissions going on. Well, things have changed. We've made some great environmental progress since the time that this was taken. And this is a picture from 1918, if you look down on the bottom right. And what's happened is we've shifted to different industries. Pittsburgh now has lots of robotics and medicine and software companies and less steel mills. We've invested in a great deal of pollution prevention and pollution control. And we've invested in a large number of green buildings in the Pittsburgh area. One of the things that contributed to the air pollution that you see in this picture isn't just the steel mills, but it was the coal that was being burned to heat residential buildings. And so this is the Pittsburgh now. Those are the river valleys. They still exist. And we can see that there's been tremendous strides to improve the environment. And the topics that I'm talking about are kind of the latest reign of these things to improve the Pittsburgh environment. I started off by looking at computers and trying to improve computers. There's a whole bunch of other things that life cycle assessment can do. Probably the first thing that you want to try and achieve with it is trying to improve products and processes. You want to look at bottleneck identification. You want to look at improved procurement specifications. You want to compare alternative designs and pick out the ones that are the best. So that's kind of the first reason that some of you might be interested in environmental life cycle assessment, essentially to improve your products and processes. Second reason is regulation. Regulation is starting to require some consideration of life cycle. And so to comply with these new regulations that are coming along, you need to engage in some life cycle assessment of what the impacts of things might be over a long period of time. The other thing that's happening is the product certification world. If you're buying any sort of products, if you're doing procurement of any kind, you're looking at certified products, and you're starting to see that more and more those products are having to contend with life cycle impacts. And I'll say a little bit more about product certification because that's something that we'll be talking about in the implementation session. There's a great deal of market confusion in the area of environmental product certification right at the moment. A lot of confusion about what might constitute a green building product. There are numerous eco-labels that exist. There's several in every country, it seems like, in the world. Many of them focus on single attribute environmental products, impacts. Examples of that are recycled content or energy use as a single attribute. What's going on in the world of product certification is that the industry is trying to make these certifications more credible. They're trying to come up with scientific, third-party verified and defensible certifications. And much of the basis for those scientific, third-party verified methodologies is in the environmental life cycle assessment world. So, what is life cycle assessment? It's essentially tracing out an impact from material extraction, through material processing, through manufacturing, through use phase, and through end-of-life waste management. And it's accounting during that life cycle for any kind of recycle, remanufacture, reuse cycles that might exist. And I thought I'd give you an idea about life cycle assessment by looking at a cup of coffee. So a lot of you probably have a cup of coffee in front of you, or you certainly had one this morning. And I'm going to take a look at a cup of coffee and try and figure out whether there might be bauxite involved in the life cycle of having a cup of coffee. So you look at my cup of coffee and there isn't any apparent bauxite, but if you start tracing back the supply chain associated with the cup of coffee, I start off by saying, well, I've got to have a mug, I've got to have cream, sugar, I've got to have coffee. Let me just pick out the coffee, and I say, well, what goes into making that coffee? Coffee beans, filter, water, coffee maker. I go and say, well, let's trace out what goes on with the coffee beans. And there's a lot of agricultural inputs, but there's also shipping. We tend to import coffee from places that are a long way away. And if you just take a look at the shipping, that involves vehicles, it involves multiple modes, and you go back and those vehicles are comprised of steel and aluminum and plastic, and that aluminum, the ore for that is bauxite. So involved in the life cycle of providing a cup of coffee is some bauxite way back in the supply chain. And that's an environmental impact associated with mining that bauxite and providing it to make your cup of coffee. And I just kind of gave you a flavor of the sort of life cycle assessment thinking that goes on in that little example. I didn't consider the 4 other simple components. I just traced out one little route through the supply chain. There are thousands of other branches in a supply chain. And I also didn't detail the specific impacts associated with all those different stages. The trucks, the fertilizer, all of those have environmental impacts associated with them. To do a real environmental life cycle assessment, you got to look at all those different stages. Fortunately, there's some kind of standardized approaches and databases that can be used to help you with environmental life cycle assessment. There are a couple of different standard ways of doing it. One is process-based. That's what I just did. There are a lot of different processes associated with the supply chain for coffee. Typical databases for that are things like EcoInvent. EcoInvent comes from Switzerland, actually. That sort of process-based approach is detailed, tedious, think thousands of dollars to actually get it done. A second approach is economic input-output, uses national economic sectors and average emissions. A typical database is www.eiolca.net. This is fast, cheap, but pretty aggregate. If I do a life cycle assessment, I typically do a hybrid, so I use both process-based and economic input-output. And I should mention there's significant uncertainty for all of these different approaches. So anytime you see an environmental life cycle assessment, think to yourself, lots of uncertainty in that thing. I wanted to say a couple of words about carbon footprinting, because that's been in the press quite a bit lately, and a lot of companies are now having to report their carbon footprints. Life cycle assessment considers a wide range of environmental impacts. You do water use, energy use, toxic emissions, that sort of thing. Carbon footprinting only does greenhouse gas emissions. Life cycle assessment is cradle to grave, the way I put it out. Carbon footprinting is often only company-specific or company plus some supply chain. So I always think of carbon footprinting as a subset of life cycle assessment. It uses the same sort of procedures, but it's only looking at a portion of the environmental impact. And of course, as I started off saying, carbon emissions reporting is starting to appear worldwide for all of you. So our implementation session, we're going to do a review of product certification requirements and impacts. That's going to be led by Paul Bertram, who's sitting right here from Kingspan. He's the past president of the Construction Specifications Institute, so he lives with product certifications from day to day. We're going to demonstrate several life cycle assessment and carbon footprinting tools, and I certainly hope we have time for an exchange of participants' relevant experiences and plans. This will be in the Essex room. By the time you finish the implementation session, you should understand the basic concepts of life cycle assessment. Like I've already given you a flavor of that. And we'll also do some construction examples, which I didn't have time for in this presentation. Thank you very much.
This presentation is entitled Leveraging Technology to Improve the Implementation of Value-Improving Practices and Startup Planning, an Aramco case study. Here from Saudi Aramco is Abdurrahman Abdi, an expert for value-improving practices. Since 2008, he has been key to promoting the firm's CII best practice implementation on capital projects. He recently introduced a tool that guides project stakeholders through the startup planning process. Ladies and gentlemen, Abdurrahman Abdi.
Good morning. It is an honor and a privilege to be able to address you today in this conference. As we were reminded by one of the keynote speakers, in just a few days, the Summer Olympics will start in London, England. Putting aside their political differences, more than 200 nations will come together in the spirit of the Olympics tradition and share their common passion for sports on a global scale. Isn't that exciting? We won't be giving out medals here at this conference, but we are like the Olympic athletes in that we've gathered here together to share our common interests. In tribute to the Olympics spirit, it is fitting that we use one of the sporting events to illustrate a point. I'm sure you will agree that managing a project has many things in common with competing in a rowing race. A winning team consistently implements best practices to accomplish their mission. In both cases, whether you are managing a project or competing in a rowing race, the team needs to plan carefully, and in this case, very, very carefully. The team must steer right to take the desired heading. It is a must to have the right team to start strong and have a chance of winning. What differentiates the winning team from the rest is the team's coordination, including best practices implementations. To have a fair chance of winning, the team must stay on course with no or minimal change along the way. Maintaining optimum balance among the competing objectives will enable the team to perform at its best. It's important that the team knows where they are at all times by continuously measuring progress towards the objective. Following through every effort all the way to the finish line is the way to win. And of course, the winning team is the one that crosses the finish line before they celebrate. Leveraging industry practices and today's technology will to gain a competitive edge will undoubtedly give the team a chance to win. Saudi Aramco has been implementing best practices on capital projects for many, many years, for the past decade and a half, and all along we strive to find a consistently winning formula. We've adapted best practices from CII and other organizations. We created a division that's dedicated of finding ways of improving project performance, and within that division, we created a best practices group. We trained local contractors to augment the best practices facilitators available for our capital projects. Despite all these efforts, we still faced some challenging obstacles. Regardless of all the resources we committed, the implementation rates of our best practices remained lower than desired. Implementation timing was not always optimal, with sessions often being conducted well beyond their optimum window. Also, there was a lack by key stakeholders, and as a result, their engagement was not effective or strong. The size and complexity of the projects we undertake and the environment in which we execute them also pose a unique challenge. To improve the implementation of best practices and make them more effective, we've developed what we call the Value Practices Management System, or VPMS in short. Its intuitive interface presents an appealing collaborative environment. In our breakout session, we will discuss how users became active partners in implementing value-improving practices, which are shown here on our capital projects. We will demonstrate how the system identifies the practices that have the highest value for particular projects and how users interactively schedule their implementations optimally. In particular, we will discuss how the VPMS has fundamentally changed the behavior and the perception of stakeholders towards the best practices in general, but particularly the planning for the startup. The VPMS has fundamentally increased the implementation rate of the value improving practices. Shown here are some statistics that compare our implementation rate before and after. When we look back the 3 years prior to when we rolled this tool, which was mid-2011, on an average, we used to plan about 150 sessions, and our implementation rate for best practices was about 40%. Since we rolled this tool out in mid-2011, the implementation rate jumped to 70%. This year alone, we are planning to have about 170 sessions of all the different practices and the value improving practices, and as of to date, our implementation rate is about 95%. If we look at closely into the planning for a startup, which is one of the best practices we adapted from CII, in the same time frame, we plan about 25 sessions. Prior to we rolling out this tool, the implementation rate was about 15%. Since then, 40%. This year alone, we're planning to have 28 projects for planning for a startup, and as of to date, our implementation rate is about 100%. The VPMS has produced many additional benefits. It increased the request for follow-up sessions. This is a major shift from our earlier experience. It increased owner organization's participation, another major impact. It enabled our project management teams to be more proactive in implementing value-improving practices on the capital projects. As a result, the relationship of project stakeholders improved because the system created a collaborative environment and an environment that enabled every member to be more proactive and efficient. It enabled project management teams to be able to develop a comprehensive, realistic, attainable, startup schedules. In our breakout session, we have perspectives from an owner, the Riyadh refinery, a project management team member, and a system development leader. Together, we will demonstrate the usefulness of this tool and share examples of the positive impact it had on our projects, but specifically on the clean fuels project of Riyadh refinery, which is one of our case studies. You will learn how to build a collaborative environment for projects and how we leverage it. This tool, both to increase the implementation of value-improving practices, but also to increase the perceived value of the best practices, and how the system made our stakeholders more engaging and proactive in implementing best practices on capital projects. So come and join us to exchange insight on this topic. We've put together an engaging session that includes an overview of the value practices management system, 2, our case study, which is on a complex refining facility with unique challenges, and 3, we'll show how the project team utilizes the value practices management system in general, but more so the planning for a startup module, which is within the VPMS, will show with immediate impact on the performance of our projects, particularly our case study project. Thank you for your attention, and we look forward to seeing you this afternoon at Solone. Thank you.
This research team report is on modularization, how to optimize, how to maximize. Our speaker is Fred Haney, an executive director for Fluor Canada, with over 40 years of experience in the engineering and construction of facilities for the oil, gas, refinery, chemical, and mineral processing industries. He currently serves as Fluor's corporate subject matter expert for modularization and consults on several projects around the world. He has extensive experience in engineering management and all project phases, from front-end planning to startup. Join me welcoming Fred Haney.
Good morning, everyone. I'm certainly honored to represent Research Team 283 and present the results of our team's work over the last 2 years on how to maximize modularization and how to optimize. I'm not sure, you probably would be surprised if I told you that the manufacturing industry is significantly leading the industry in productivity improvements over the last 30 years. But surprisingly enough, the construction industry is lagging. What is the problem here? Why are we stuck in second gear? Now, we know that the manufacturing industry is using modularization and standardization substantially, and that's helped them to improve their productivity. We know we're using modularization in the construction industry as well. But why aren't we getting these similar gains? Are we constrained by our own internally established limits? What if our projects were totally modular? What must our industry do to move more man-hours off-site efficiently and to improve overall productivity? What can our companies do? Well, I was fortunate enough to be part of a very large, highly experienced and energized research team. Our modular experience and influence truly spans the globe over a broad range of industry sectors. We have over 450 years of experience on over 170 modular projects in the past 5 years, including substantial global contact over 13 countries. So our essential question that we needed to answer was, What changes or adaptations in traditional project work processes are required to create an optimum environment for broader and more effective use of modularization? Accordingly, our research hypothesis and objectives all were focused to support this essential question. As it turned out, the optimum environment was not just about work processes. We also examined the industry and projects' cultures, mindsets, strategies, policies, and others that are in the same category. Our research efforts focused on development of 5 essential elements as depicted in our team flag here. At the project level, we started with the business case. The business case to develop your modular content and need to modularize. Followed by that is the execution plan and the differences that you need to implement in a modular environment. From there, we tied the business case along with the execution plan to 21 critical success factors, all at the project level. Now, in speaking about manufacturing, in some cases at the business unit level, combining design standardization with modularization prior to project initiation can definitely lead to more value. As a final part, we looked at a solution which entails maximization enablers that, at the overall industry level. From a research team methodology perspective, the essential question led to problem framing, literature review, establishment of terminology, and building solution elements. CSFs managed to help cross-check the business case and execution plan differences. All solution elements were expanded with in-depth case studies, and ultimately we had that verified by an external review committee. Now let's look at each one of these 5 elements. The business case, timing is everything, but optimal timing will vary under differences of project conditions. For example, there are projects where an early decision is necessary for optimal approach. And then there are projects where a late decision is possible. Most optimal solutions, though, should fall within each of these zones. To support an effective business case decision, we developed a workflow chart. The focus is to identify the optimum level of work hours to move off-site. This can be an iterative process depending on information available. More will be provided during our implementation sessions, so please attend. Project organizations need to adjust execution plans to accommodate the modular approach. We focused on the excess of 100 ways in which execution plans need to be adjusted to better serve the modular approach. Selection, basic design, and EPC are the subject titles with which differences have been organized. Again, you'll hear more about this in our implementation session. Critical success factors highlight important steps, resources, and conditions needed for successful modular projects. We analyzed these CSFs by implementation timing and appropriate leadership. Here you can see the importance of early attention to these factors, particularly by the project owner. Note that more than 3/4 of the CSFs need to be implemented or in place prior to EPC. We have developed a CSF fabric laying out the responsibility and timing of implementation. Overlaid is an example of a CSF, early completion recognition. In this case, early completion recognition of economic benefits is led by the owner during assessment through selection phases. Now, we also examine CSFs according to how frequently each occurs and is achieved. The industry has a long ways to go, and our organizations need to do more work. You can see that 1/3 of the 21 CSFs occur only rarely or very rarely. Again, you'll hear more about this in the implementation session. Now, the previous CII shipbuilding studies prompted our team to examine how standardization can enhance modularization. And I did discuss that a little earlier when I indicated where manufacturing has progressed. But, for example, a power plant may be partly modular. In the shipbuilding industry, they've mastered both modular and standardization. If you take a look at all the other industries, they fare in different zones in the amount of standardization and modularization that's used. Our implementation session will describe how a standardized modular approach on a power plant resulted in significant project benefits. Leveraging the benefits of modularization with standardization can lead to breakthrough results. Modularization maximization enablers. In our research, we came to a realization that this in our industry must change many significant ways if it is going to achieve stepwise advancements. Specifically, we described 10 maximization enablers that can facilitate such advancement. Here are two examples. Engineering schools should establish and promote a new design process paradigm. They should start by teaching the modular approach, not just the stick-built approach, and seek to a more integrated modular approach routine in the design of capital projects. Secondly, the industry needs a different approach to scoping and configuring equipment to make it more modularization friendly. To achieve this, there is requirement for more collaboration between all the stakeholders. For our 5 solution elements, breadth, timing, and primary audience vary with each solution element. And these will be discussed, as I said, along with the other elements in our implementation session. So please join us in Harborside Salon D, where we will have Charlie Foster champion our overall implementation session, and we will be pleased to provide you some handouts of these 5 key elements to take away and start implementing on your projects. Thank you.
Our final plenary presentation of the conference is from the Professional Development Committee and is titled The Cultural Dimension of Global Learning. We are happy to welcome back Mike Peters, the Director of Learning and Development for the Shaw Power Group. Mike has extensive experience in evaluating enterprise training needs and recommending and executing training and development programs for many clients in many countries around the world. He is an expert group facilitator and provides both technical and relationship-based training programs. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Peters.
Good morning to you all. Real quick before I get in, just got a quick housekeeping item, and this comes directly from Jules, so you all need to pay attention. If you look at your evaluation sheet, line item number 25, if you look at that, that's this presentation. Unfortunately, it shows Fred is pitching a doubleheader. So if you can take his name off and go ahead and put my name on there. It's not that big a deal. I filled out over 400 of those last night, so everything should be fine as we go forward. Talk to you a little bit about the cultural dimensions of global learning, but before we get into that, really want to recognize the Professional Development Committee. The men and women on the committee put a lot of effort into this, a lot of time, really a great group of people to work with, and I really enjoy my time with them. So as we think about this and think about the theme and all the other things, and actually Stephen was talking about the pressure of talking to Congress and all the things that he goes through. You know, I'm standing in front of about 600 people. I'm between y'all and lunch. So I'll make sure to keep this going as we go through. But why is this important to us? When we think about globalization, I know that's kind of the theme for the conference and what we've been working on and talking about. You know, it's not a fad, it's not the flavor of the month, it's not something that's going to pass, it's something that we're all going to be dealing with, whether you know, in your own organization or through a supplier or a vendor or a subcontractor. This is something that we all deal with, and it's not going anywhere, so it's going to be important to us as we go forward. But also, too, why is it important to us? As member companies, what does it mean to us when we think about this whole thing of globalization? If you look in Research Summary 263-1, they kind of identified three things, and really want to think about the number 2 and number 3. It's really in thinking about the increase of the scope of these projects that we're going to be working on. And also, too, the increased competition, not only from the folks in this room, but from folks outside of this room, the other global competitors that we all compete against on a daily basis. So those are the things that are really driving this. And what does that really mean when we think about this going forward? The other thing, and again, I know a lot of you all like data, specifically Wayne, if you look at this, and this came out of the same research summary, estimated global construction market is $7.5 trillion. That's going to change. In 2008 dollars, by the year 2020, it's going to be $12.7 trillion. We're going to be doing this work. In order for all of us to be successful, we're going to have to do this work, and we're going to have to expand in doing that. So what does that really mean? Last fall at the Board of Advisors meeting up in Minneapolis, Dr. Thomas Stinson, who's the lead economist for the state of Minnesota, talked to the group. He was talking about some of these things, the economic success for the 21st century. I thought it was very interesting. He broke it down and shared some of these three things, talking about retention, talking about recruitment, and talking about retraining. So what does that mean to us as organizations? Well, it's still about people. At the end of the day, we still are about people. We have new processes, we have new technologies, we have new systems, but at the end of the day, it's still people. People need to do the work. That's the nature of our business, and that's the way it's always been, and that's the way that it will be. So these people have to be trained. Think about the knowledge that has to be transferred. We've talked about this in past conferences. Think about the information that a lot of you have in your head. A lot of us are a lottery ticket from not showing up to work tomorrow. It is Wednesday, and Powerball is the drawing tonight, and I do have the winning ticket. So for the folks at Shaw, you guys are on your own getting from the airport. But think about that. Think about when that knowledge leaves, how do we transfer it? Now we're talking more at a global perspective as well. How do we transfer that knowledge, and how do we have to do that? And we still have to increase those skills as we do. This is another one that Dr. Stinson talks about, and it's an interesting slide, and don't panic. If you look over on the left, you see the state of Minnesota. They haven't taken their 10,000 lakes and seceded from the Union. That's not what's happened. We're going to let Texas do that first, because I know that's important to you all. But what was surprising to me when you think about this is there's the perspective that I think a lot of us had, that outside of the United States, there was this vast array of people that could do the work for us. There's this huge workforce that's waiting for us to show up and do that. But that's not the case. It's not the case. It's the same thing in some of the trends that we're seeing here, they're seeing in other parts of the world as well. So again, how does this all work, and how does this all get through? So think about the challenges, not only from a logistical standpoint, thinking about maybe doing training and transferring knowledge and doing all those things at a global place, but think about the cultures, think about the learning styles, think about all those things that are different. So a lot of the challenges we have is taking US-based training and then moving it across the world and being successful, so we can be successful, not only as an organization, but as companies that we all represent. I'm asking you guys to take a little test. I know it's right before lunch, but I'm asking you guys to take a little test. As a matter of fact, I want you to imagine that you're a trainer. You know, we heard yesterday from some of the folks in the ACE program. I think the young lady said at the age of 7, she knew she wanted to be an architect. I think if she got to talk a little bit more, her second choice was probably to be a trainer. I know for many of you that was a dream. It was cowboy, it was fireman, it was policeman, and it was a trainer. But the challenge we have as trainers is what? The first thing we have to overcome is our fear of public speaking. It's the number one fear that most people have. By the way, number 2 is death. But number 1 is public speaking. More people would rather be in a coffin than delivering a eulogy, but I'm going to help you through that. One of the tricks that I've done in learning how to do this and do what I do is use visualization. I learned it in sports, and a lot of us use it maybe playing golf or whatever, is you visualize the shot. You hear people saying that, visualize that. So what I'm going to ask you to do is visualize yourselves as a trainer. You're up here teaching a training class and get that image in your head. I'll share with you one of my tricks. This is kind of how I visualize myself when I'm up in front of the room. And it really does, it does help for me. Now, the committee wanted to take about 10 minutes and have kind of a video to the homage of George Clooney and everything that was George. Unfortunately, Wayne spent all the budget in collecting data, so we can't do that. So you all just need to visualize, and I'll help you with that as we go through. So you've got your visualization. You're that trainer. You're going to teach this class, all right? So we're conducting a class. As you go through the class, you get a response from one of your participants, and you give this simple sign. Well, what does that mean? Well, in the U.S., it means it's okay. In Japan, you would be talking about money. In France, it's zero or worthless. However, if you're in Brazil, you're probably not going to be invited to Carnival. What does this mean then? Again, coming back, teaching that class. Good job here in the United States. Wishing you all the best. In France, it means one. So again, it's that cultural dimension, that cultural dynamic that we're talking about that, again, some of us here, again, being a lot of US-based companies, don't take into account when we do these things. But good news for you all. Both CI and the Professional Development Committee is here to help. From a CI standpoint, there's a lot of research products out there. These are just some that we've got. The International Project Risk Assessment, I've used it. It's very, very good. Also, too, the globalization, looking at how you build that successful engineering construction company. And then the one at the top there about the assessment tool. Very, very good tool. So CI has got some things out there. Now, specifically around the areas of training, that's where our group, that's where our committee is going to come in to help you. So what we're going to ask you to do is come to our implementation session. You're going to hear from 3 companies. The first one's going to be Procter & Gamble, and thinking about how Procter & Gamble adapted their training approach. Thinking about from the areas of construction and working in over 40-plus countries around the world. Again, US-based training that they've been able to move across to 40-plus countries around the globe. Talking about how they're using web-based training and how they use case studies and then attune that to the cultures that they're working in order to transfer that knowledge and get that training done. The second group you're going to hear from is Dow Chemical. Now, we talked about Procter & Gamble from the construction side. Dow Chemical is going to share their lessons learned around how they've got with their global engineering workforce and how they've been able to share those experiences, hear those lessons learned, talk about how they've been able to deliver some of those traditional classes in different formats, but again, moving it across the globe in what they do. And then the last is going to be the Shaw Group, a specific case study of training, very technical training that was done for one of our clients over in China. So we've kind of got some construction perspective, we've got the engineering perspective, and then the perspective of a specific project that was done over in China, and talk about the cultural challenges. In fact, the person that facilitated the class is going to be the one in our implementation session. So what we're going to do, again, in our implementation session after lunch, we'll have our presentations, we'll have a little bit of panel discussion, we'll make sure we leave plenty of time for questions if you have them. Again, as always, with the Professional Development Committee, there'll be some great prizes awarded as you come to that. So what we're going to be doing, our panel, I know we mentioned the Olympics just a second ago, kind of our dream team. We've got our moderator, Diane Underwood, this year's recipient of the Instructor of the Year. How good is that? Instructor of the Year running our panel. It's like LeBron James being on our intramural team as we go through. Our panelist is going to be Rick Bellato from Procter & Gamble, talking about his perspective around the construction side. Tracy Herring from Dow Chemical, and last but not least, Stephen James from Shaw Group. So I encourage you all to come. I encourage you all to attend. I think there's some great stuff, some great discussion, some great lessons learned that you can feel and hear from some of your folks that are there. One last test before I let you go to lunch. What does this mean? Well, you're going to have to come to the Grand Ballroom at 1 or 2:15 to find out. With that, folks, thank you all so very much. I appreciate the time.